So I want to back up a little bit and do something kind of broad here, which is that you've mentioned Sam a couple of times, and little things that you disagree with that you're saying are partly semantic and partly not semantic, I suppose. I'm curious because our debate just in general in the country is we're so hostile to each other, and everyone's outraged, and people lying about each other all the time. When you take someone that you obviously respect and like Sam, and you have a public disagreement with him, or just not that you're attacking him, but that you just disagree on this position, how do you go about doing it in a public way that it doesn't veer into all the stuff that we see? I know that's not the way you operate in general,
yes.
but I think it's an interesting place because everyone's so used to attacking everybody that if you even disagree with someone without attacking them, somehow people don't even know what to make of that. You know?
Well, Sam and I have never debated any of these issues in public. I'm not sure he even knows that, that we disagree on a few of these things. I mean, we're in agreement on so many issues. Maybe a better analogy would be him and Dan Dennett, which a lot of atheists are like, oh no, two of our big leaders are disagreeing on this one thing. It's like, that's okay.
Great. Isn't that good?
Are you kidding me? Well, but this is back to the tribalism. Like, this is our tribe, and these are the 12 things we believe in this group here. And wait a minute, there's a disagreement? Well, of course there's disagreement.
Yeah.
And that should be perfectly okay. But because the way our culture is set, it's so tribal and conflicting, and it's sort of a battleground for ideas that it feels like, oh, we gotta get everybody on the same page so that, the theists over there don't see that the atheists are doing something over here that is making us look bad. Oh, come on, this is too much.
Isn't it funny, though, you'd think that the atheists, who are only bound by not believing in something that's not provable, you'd think they'd be a little more flexible. I don't want to say they, but you'd think that the group think of it would be a little more flexible intellectually to say, this is actually kind of cool. Like, I like the fact that Sam has put something forth that I'm not quite there on, that you feel a little differently. I'm like, to me, that's what it's all about. And yet,
yes, of course.
And yet
but instead of calling
run from that.
Like I also disagree with Sam about AI. He thinks it's possibly an existential threat. I don't. Okay, that's okay. But if it was just a bunch of scientists or philosophers talking about things like that survey I mentioned, there's disagreement all over the place. That's perfectly normal. But because we've regrouped some of us into a collective that goes against the Christian right or the theists, and we're the atheists, it seems like we have to circle the wagons a little more.
That's interesting. So it's almost like we've taken what should be scientists and thinkers doing this sort of separate. We've thrown them into pop culture,
right?
And then they're trying to make arguments in the same way they would privately, but now they're trying to do it within the culture of craziness.
Right.
That's almost an unwinnable proposition, right?
It's the problem with labels. Atheist, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a worldview.
Yeah.
What are we? We're humanists, or secular humanists, or Enlightenment humanists, or we believe in civil rights and civil liberties and equal treatment under the law. We believe in reason and science and rationality and logic. We need to define ourselves by what we believe, not just by what we don't believe. And when you do that, then atheism is like, oh, that's just this little thing over here. Here's the stuff in the big tent. Like when I got in the movement, when he started Skeptic magazine in '92, and I started looking into sort of visiting humanist conferences and talking to the humanists, because there's sort of this division of labor, the atheist skeptics, no, there's the skeptics and then atheist humanists. It's sort of two different cohorts. And I thought, why can't they just be under one tent? Well, part of the problem was Paul Kurtz originally separated them when he started Skeptical Inquirer magazine and Free Inquiry magazine, is a division of labor in part for fundraising reasons and stuff. But also, the humanists have a pretty strong left progressive political agenda, and skeptics tend to kind of be all over the place a little bit more. And also that troubled me, because it's like, well, wait, these are the 12 things we believe as humanists, but I don't believe 4 of these 12. So what am I? I mean, why do we have to? The label forces you into this box. It's like, these are the things in the box. Well, but can I have half of them in the box? Because I like the libertarians. They have 6 of the 12 points. I like those.
Yeah, and by the way, I might swap a couple things in the box in a year or two. You know?
We should. It would be better if it was more fluid and the labels weren't so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke at the Reason rally in D.C. a couple months ago, and I could not believe the amount of little infighting amongst people and all of this.
Right.
And I went up there and I spoke about how we need to be the tolerant ones and we need to not deplatform
Right.
people and all that
Yes,
stuff.
right.
And I'm surprised I wasn't
Good for you.
deplatformed
Yes,
for it,
right.
but there
Yeah.
we are. All right, so let's shift topics a little bit. Let's go to free speech, because you are teaching now at Chapman University.
Mm-hmm.
They sent out a letter basically saying, and you can, I'm going to paraphrase, you can clean it up a little bit, but basically saying, suck it up, we're going to be down with free speech. And University of Chicago did this a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
And I do sense that maybe we are finally seeing the tide turn on some of what has been going on at our academic institutions.
I think so.
Yeah?
I hope you're right.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Okay, good.
I think you're right. Well, so the University of Chicago letter came out, and then I sent that to the president of Chapman, Jim Doty, and I said, hey, we should do something like this. And initially, they were a little hesitant, like, well, we don't have a big issue here at Chapman. There's no big protest or anything like that. So I said, yeah, okay, why stir the pot? And then he issues this letter after all. It's like, we're not into disinviting speakers and trigger warnings and all that stuff. Is like, yes, good. So, my first day in class there, I said, here's your trigger warning. There will be no trigger warnings. This is college.
Yeah.
And
what kind of pushback did you get on that?
Well, these are freshmen. They're like, whatever, okay. They're still trying to get oriented to life. But I think for the most part, most people agree with us that this has gone too far. I think the vocal minority are they get a lot of media attention. You go on a college campus, if you watch the news, you'd think, oh my God, these places are falling apart. You go there, you don't see much of this at all.
Yeah.
It's really isolated. But it's still there, and it's troubling. I just gave a talk recently at Cal State Fullerton, because they had a big brouhaha last year over Taco Tuesday.
Yeah.
And the sorority got reprimanded for cultural appropriation.
Because kids were wearing sombreros and drinking margaritas.
This is Southern California. We have a huge Hispanic population. There's taco trucks around. I mean, it's great. So what? In any case, America is a cultural appropriation country. That's all we do.
So is there some piece of that we're missing? As two white guys, are we not understanding something that we should be sympathetic to here?
I think in part it's a spectrum that, yes, you and I can't know what it's like to be an African-American female in America, for example, obviously. So I've asked, what is it that's really happening here? Like at Chapman, for example, they have a safe space for LGBTQIA members there at Chapman. Okay, so they had a meeting, I went, this was last year. What's it all about? I'm just really curious. And these were the nicest people. They're like, we just like to hang out, and there is some discrimination against the LGBTQIA community here, and so this is a place, and they were very nice about it. It's like, okay, we all kind of have safe spaces. You're home. I ride my bike with my buddies every Tuesday, Thursday morning, and we're in our little group. We talk about stuff I would never say publicly, and everybody, people have those. So it's a little bit like that. Okay, that's okay, fine. But then when I kind of pressed it a little bit, like, well, you said there's been an upsurge in these kinds of comments or incidences. Yeah. Like how many? I mean, what are we talking about? One a week, one a month, one a year? Well, we haven't really collected data. It just seems like there's more emails coming to our little group here.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how many were there last year or the year before? We don't have any data. How many LGBTQI people are there at Chapman University? No idea. We're not allowed to ask. Okay, so, I mean, is there even a problem? I don't know. I mean, people say, well, this happened. Okay, give me an example. All right, well, a gay couple was walking down the sidewalk on the perimeter of Chapman University, and some guy in a pickup truck drove by and made a remark, a nasty remark. It's like, okay, really? Because that kind of happens, there's assholes.
To all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons. Right.
In other words, there's assholes in the world. There always will be. What should you do? Okay, you can ignore it. If you're feeling frisky, I told him, you could say, "Fuck off, asshole."
Yeah.
And then he says, "Fuck off," and then if that feels good, do it. If not, okay.
I've done that. I was in Philadelphia once in the gay little section there, and some guys drove by and called me and my friends screaming fags.
Yeah.
I said, "Go fuck yourself."
Yeah.
That was it.
Good.
I
Good
felt
for you.
Yeah, and that was it. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't need to hunt them down. And so is that the problem that so you were asking for empirical evidence?
Yes.
You wanted something to quantifiably be able to say, oh, there is a trend here.
Yes, right.
And as opposed to sort of young people just sort of stepping into the real world,
right,
experiencing something, and then they're shielding themselves from
right.
it. That's a problem, because 4 years later, they're going to get into a much wider world and shit happens.
Right. Now, again, on the spectrum thing, like the Halloween costumes issue at Yale last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, don't show up in blackface. If you're a white guy, I mean, you're just a dick if you do that.
Yeah.
Just don't do that.
Yeah.
All right, and then
you have a right to do it.
Yes,
right? You're not.
right,
You have a
of
right
course,
to do it,
right.
but you're a dick.
Right, exactly. Like when Ted Danson did this, when he was dating Whoopi Goldberg, and he shows up at one of these award ceremonies. Oh, it was complete backfire. Not funny, and then everybody got the message. Okay, you know what? That's just not cool.
Even though Whoopi was okay with it.
Yes,
But
yeah. And then, so the scale goes down from there. Like last year, my wife and I went to Bill Nye's house for Halloween, and she dressed up in a Native American costume.
Lord.
She looked super hot, and I loved it. And we had no idea this was a culture. This was 2 years ago. This was before the cultural appropriation thing hit. Yeah. Now this has become. It's like, okay, come on. Now the blackface, yes. Dress up as a ghost. No, there's a spectrum in between. Just use good judgment. So these are adults. Do they really need a list, like the microaggression list that University of California sent out to all their students? Here's the things you can and cannot say. One of which is, you speak English so well, to a foreigner or something like that. Well, my wife gets this all the time. Her English is perfect. And you're from Germany, you speak English so well. You know what she says? Thank you.
Yeah.
So, but other things like, wow, you look so pretty for a black woman. Now, this was an example that this African-American woman gave on the panel at this Cal State Fullerton thing I spoke at. And it's like, okay, that's a pretty obnoxious thing to say.
It's an obnoxious thing to say, but is it warranted of
I don't
penalize somebody at the university or
right,
something like that?
Right.
Is all of this just a function of our success, actually, as a society?
I think so. That's exactly it. It's that we've made so much moral progress that we've ratcheted up these tiny little things into something like, it's like the Vietnam War that used to be protested in the 60s. Now we're protesting Halloween costumes.
Right. So this is a great takeaway. I mean, that really is if someone wants to feel good about this conversation that the country's having, that's the takeaway, right?
Yes. Yeah. Things have gotten so much better. I mean, it's like we don't have to protest interracial marriage laws that prohibited it because we're done with that. Gay marriage laws, we're done with that. And it's like, so most of the big stuff we've really chunked along here nicely. And now we're left with these little tidbits. And so the pendulum swings too far. Now, language does matter. The N-word and so forth, yes, I get that. But not all words are the same equivalent of that. And so when you start nitpicking down here, you're really taking away from the importance of the things that really matter.
Yeah. So when you see like Black Lives Matter, we've seen at a couple of universities where they've either said we're going to have meetings without white people, or white people aren't welcome, or literally put white people in the back, or a series of these types of things, or where they interrupted the Pride Parade in Toronto and said, unless you guys, talking to the gays, which are thought of as another repressed group, unless you guys sign our list of demands, we're not even going to allow the parade to continue. When you see tactics like that, I assume you think the motivation is good, right? Like or do you?
Well,
or
I think
is it just gone completely awry at that point?
Well, I think it's gone too far for sure, and it's not because they're not inclusive. In fact, they're kind of bigoted in their exclusivity. They're doing the very opposite of what they claim they're doing, and they're doing the same thing the other guys they claim are doing. Probably, really, it should just be called Black Lives Matter too, because yes, of course, we would all sign on with that, as in also.
Yeah. Yes,
of course. That's a complicated issue. Every one of those cases is different. Police brutality on blacks and murders and so on. They're all different. Some of them are clearly really bad, and these guys should be tried for murder. Other cases, clearly, the guy was grabbing the cop's gun. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And there, everything in between.
Everything in between.
So. The Black Lives Matter just sort of throws them all into this one big category. They're not. This is part of the problem of our binary thinking. We just think it's all in this and all in that. That's sort of categorical. We want to put everything in a category. Forget it. Just call it exactly what it is. This particular thing here.
Yeah. So how do you, as a public person that stakes out positions and writes about all of this stuff, and I don't know of any topic that you would be afraid. Is there something you would be afraid to touch before I even finish that sentence?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. So. This one, though, because when you talk about race, it's become so toxic. Do you ever find yourself self-censoring, even for someone, as you said, you have a group of friends that you would say things to that you may not say publicly.
Yes.
Do you find yourself self-censoring in a public way?
Of course, yeah. At this talk at Cal State Fullerton, I had to preface my comments and responses to the other panelists by saying, I don't know what it's like to be an African American or a woman. I don't. I understand, but
It's funny you have to say that.
Yeah, that I even have to. Yes, yeah. And but then but that's a way of sort of acknowledging. I understand that your perspective is different from mine, and that at least allows you to then say whatever it is you want to say. Like if people are really saying things like that to you, like, oh, you're pretty for a black woman, or your hair feels like a sponge, and how unusual. I find hard to believe, because I'm looking out at a sea of Hispanics and African Americans and Native Americans. This is a huge campus with a very diverse. I mean, people are really walking around still saying stuff like that. If they are, that's really bad. But that can't be common.
Right, and that's the thing. It strikes me as irrelevant, really. And this is something where I think the left has failed, because they think that words mean action. You know what I mean? Like, you could go on the New York City subway and be with every single type of person that has ever existed on this planet. There's probably an Eskimo there and a Neanderthal. I mean, you could be with everybody. These people don't have to love each other. They don't have to be nice to each other. We have to act civilly towards each other. But you can have your own private bigoted thoughts. I don't like those thoughts.
Yes.
But is that the thing? That's our strange social contract. We're trying to untie that and make it so that we all have to love each other. But really, we have to exist together. And you want as much coexistence, of course. But we don't have to all feel and think and whatever.
Love thy neighbor. I don't love my neighbors. I just want them to leave me alone. And so and the other problem with the safe spaces is it sort of sets up a situation where let's talk about the things that happen to us and build those up. And then that sets a mindset of, now I'm going to be looking for those things. And I think he made a remark. Yeah. And it's like Woody Allen in one of his films. I think he made a remark. Did he make? He said Jew eat. Jew eat. Didn't he say that? And it's like
if you want to find anti-Semitism everywhere, or if you want to find what racism.
And of course, there are some anti-Semites still left. There are some assholes still racist and. Yes, you can find them if you really look. But again, take the big perspective, it's just better than it used to be.
Yeah, and then often you end up amplifying their voices. You know what I mean? I saw this guy at the Trump rally, one of the Trump rallies, screaming about Holocaust denial, which, as you said, you've debated people on. And I thought for a second, I was like, maybe I'll retweet this and show what a fool this guy is. And then I decided not to, because I was like, this guy's irrelevant. Why would I use my voice to now put this into the ether? That this is even something that we should be thinking about or worried about.
I know. Then people start looking for it, and then the labels. I'm a victim of oppression and bigotry. I have a slide in my thing about safe. If you really want to create a safe space, go to Somalia or Syria. They need safe spaces there. And this one woman's response was, well, my pain is just as bad as anyone else's pain. You can't deny my pain. Okay, so this again, this is part of the problem. You can't do this. I'm a victim. Oh boy, here we go. People are really victims. Bad things do happen to people. It's how you respond to it that makes a difference.
Yeah. How about we finish with terrorism? How does that?
Terrorism, okay.
I didn't really have a segue there. Okay, so terrorism, let's talk about it. So the big debate about terror, I think basically from every corner, is this doctrine-based, or is this geopolitical-based, or is it both? And some people throw in a couple other things. But that seems to be the base argument, right?
Yep. Almost all human behavior is multi-causal. There's multiple motives, and I think with ISIS in particular, Al-Qaeda, but ISIS for sure, the primary driver is religion. They published an article in Dabiq of, this is why we hate you, this is why we fight you. Sam did a podcast on it. It's right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 3 are pure religion. You heretics who don't believe what we believe, which would include, by the way, Christians and Jews. So if you're not just
some people think that there's some linguistic way that it doesn't include the other monotheistic religions, but that's actually not the case.
Yeah, well, that's what they say anyway. Now I don't know to what extent Dabiq speaks for all ISIS or whatever, but anyway, and then then the second 3. So the first 3 were denial of our particular religion, denial of God, so actual atheists, and then attacks on the Quran or things like that. Then the other three were mostly geopolitical. You're over here in our lands, you're attacking our people, collateral damage, drones, and so on. And they said this is the hierarchy. This is the primary one. It's really religion, and geopolitics is second. So I take them at their word.
Right. So that's my policy is I take people at their word. So if someone says I'm killing you because of something that it says in this book, whatever the book might be,
right.
Who would John Kerry will say, well, it's not it's not religion or it doesn't represent.
Right.
Well, if the guy that did it says it represents religion, then it doesn't mean it represents everyone in the religion.
Right.
But it does represent that guy's feelings.
Right.
It only matters if you put it into action.
Yeah. Now, a harder question to answer is, to what extent do the leaders believe that thing, and the foot soldiers, do they also believe it the same way that the imams believe the religious doctrines? Are these young guys, are they in it for the money, the women, the action, the sex, and whatever they can get out of it? And maybe they also sort of kind of believe the religion and it helps drive it. I don't know. We can't. It's hard to get the data on that. Scott Atran claims it's more than just religion, but I think he's mostly talking about the foot soldiers who they motivate to do this, both ideologically and, it's good for religion, and we're going to get revenge against the Satan, the evil Americans, but also you get some action on the side, and a little money, an adventure, and a healthcare program, and we're going to take care of your family if you die. So again, multiple motivations. But primarily, really, it really is religion, and I think we can't deny that.
Right, and also the religion part is the part that offers the ultimate reward. Yes, like the 72 virgins,
right,
and all the
right.
and all the religions have their thing that you're going to get.
Yeah.
But that is an incredible. It's almost incentive to have a horrible life here.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like the worse your life is going to be, the more
the better it's going to be
awful
later.
stuff. It keeps making that gap wider, so it incentivizes that. That only religion could do that. What else could do that? Right?
Yes, that's right. That's why, in a way, it was safer when the Soviets were the bad guys, because as atheists, at least they're not looking forward to dying in the next life, so they don't want a nuclear war any more than we do.
Right. Isn't that Sam's argument about nuclear weapons? That that the Cold War led us to a standstill, basically. But you could have an apocalyptic regime in Pakistan or wherever, where their actual goal is to die as well. This is a problem.
Yes. Well, so it depends on who we're talking about. Iran as a state, I think, is less likely to use nuclear weapons if they do develop them, because we can keep them in the club of nations and keep checks and balances on that. Harder for small terrorist cells if they got a dirty bomb or something like that. It hasn't happened yet. I don't think it's an existential threat in the sense that no terrorist organization has ever overthrown a state and created a new state, and they almost never get any of their political goals. As a strategy, it doesn't really work. Okay, but what if they got a bomb and put it in New York City? Yes, of course that would be catastrophic. Not civilization ending, but because they're not capable of creating a whole stockpile of nuclear weapons. At most, they could get one. But it's harder than most people think, I think. And I think it's gotten better now under Putin of keeping track of what happened to all the fissile material and the weapons after the breakup of the Soviet Union. I think it's safer now under Putin, hate to say. But really, that's...
Well, a strong man, I guess, comes with
good at that, yes.
a certain positive side.
That's right, yeah.
Is it inevitable that we will destroy ourselves? We can take this to the AI thing before we wrap up, or through terrorism or whatever, but is it inevitable that we will just continue creating things and more power and have more and more people centralized in where they're living, as you said before, but that all of these factors will ultimately lead us to a situation where, yes, maybe not every single human on Earth is gone, but we will lead ourselves to a situation where vast majority, just because the power existed and there are bad actors, and that combination...
Not impossible, but not very likely. I'm pretty optimistic about the future.
Good.
I think it's
You've
very
given me
unlikely.
a couple points of optimism here. I appreciate it.
I really do think. Most of the doomsday scenarios that have been played out in fiction and in think tanks and so on over the last century have not come true. Not even really close. And so I think there's reason for optimism going forward. None of this is guaranteed. Yes, of course, we could have a nuclear exchange. There's still about 7,000 nuclear weapons. That's enough probably to trigger something like a nuclear winter, not to mention just raw deaths. that could do it. I think it's very unlikely that'll happen. I'm encouraged the fact that it hasn't happened since 1945. Okay,
Yeah.
the trend lines are good. Of course, the counter is just you wait. It could still happen. But the Marxists used to, with the fall of capitalism will collapse, and so everybody, those are sort of secular versions. The environmentalists, all the people that live in Idaho with their guns and gold, waiting for the government to collapse. It's going to happen under Obama. Okay. The governments really, they don't usually collapse. It's very rare, and stable governments like ours are very unlikely to collapse. I just don't see it. I'm not even worried about AI. I think there's enough checks and balances, and the development will be slow enough that we can, keep the lid on, pull the plug.
Yeah.
And states can put regulations on companies like Google and Apple and so on that are developing AI, just like they do any other technology, like Tesla and the self-driving cars. That's going to happen, but it's going to happen in a stepwise way that it will be better for society and not worse. I mean, it's not like the Tesla is going to start running over people on sidewalks to get you to your destination. It's not going to happen.
Right, and interestingly, you're saying, as someone that mostly identifies, I think, as a libertarian, you're saying that some government regulation related to that stuff will be the stuff that keeps it in check. So that goes to show where we all pick and choose some of the things that make us part of the team.
I've gotten a little slightly less libertarian as I got older, just to recognizing how much people cheat to get away with, to sort of push the rules. You got to have really good, well-defined rules and enforced, particularly in sports. I saw this in my own sport of cycling. These guys, they just push the boundaries at every chance they get, and if they think somebody else is taking the drug, then they got to take it because of the slight advantage, and it just escalates into an arms race, and so you got to have somebody put a lid on that. I saw Greg LeMond give an interview, who won the Tour de France 3 times, and he said, athletes are like children. We need strong parents going, no, you're not going to. And I actually now think Wall Street traders are sort of like young athletes in their 20s. They're, whatever I can do to push the boundary, I'm going to do it. Okay, well, we're going to, we really got to have some boundaries here. I do think states and constitutions, rules of law are necessary.
Well, I was on steroids for this interview. How does that? How do you feel about that?
Cognitive steroids, yes.
Exactly, cognitive.
I thought you seemed really, really strong and sharp today, more than usual.
Small balls, though. That's the problem. For more of Michael and Skeptic Magazine and his books and all that good stuff, we're going to put some links in the YouTube description down below, or you can check out michaelshermer.com. Thanks for watching. We'll do it again next week.